Max Talent Player. The story starts with our protagonist Kim Hyuk-jin, a talentless person that is forced to take the civil servant exam due to his lack of talent. The word talent is going to be used a lot in this novel. He gets a retest of his talent plates. Talent plates are what determine how powerful slash talented someone can be in the novel. The result for Kim Hyuk-jin? No talent. Due to his poor circumstances, he's living in the basement of someone's house. It's not specified exactly if that is the case, but the assumption can be made due to circumstances that were explained in the story. Quote, I had no talent, no connections, and no money. I had already failed the civil servant exam 3 times. 5 years ago, my mother passed away from illness. My older sister said she would take care of me. Went to work at a semiconductor factory and developed leukemia. Not very good. Uh, Typical regression story stuff. Terrible, terrible start. So, lamenting his terrible circumstances and his lack of talent, he heads off to sleep, only to find out he has regressed 10 years to the past when he woke up. So let's get into the elements of the story. So the setting is obviously South Korea. That's a South Korean novel. At times, it's a bit difficult to look up certain parts of the story due to the fact that many elements are anglicized. So maybe certain sections of South Seoul cannot be looked up due to the fact that there's just no English translated for it, and yeah, that makes it kind of difficult to imagine like in your head, like okay, what's going on? Because you might not know the details of Seoul's layout. So the themes of the story are talent. This is a huge one. It's repeated throughout the whole story. Dungeons, constellations, streaming systems, status window. That's pretty much the main theme of the story. Is like the gods, the system is just meddling with human affairs, and so humans have to play this game in order to entertain the guardians, essentially the constellations. Translation is very good. There's a few errors here and there, but it's nothing insane. So maybe a few like word errors or something feels a little clunky or perhaps could have been translated a little bit better, but it's nothing where it impedes the understanding of the story. Um, Whoever translates this had a very high level of English, and you could tell just by the way they write in the flow. So let's get into the gripes of the story that I have. It gets extremely repetitive very often. And what I mean by this is the formula that's used for arcs. So it goes like this: the MC, the main character Kim Hyuk Jin, knows the future, tells people, well, not tells people. He predicts it. He says, "Oh, this is gonna happen. I'm gonna do this," and everyone's like, "You're an idiot." And then what ends up happening is everyone's shocked when he's actually right. Everyone's like, "Holy crap!" And then he keeps telling himself every time this happens, "Oh, I'm not actually that smart. I'm not that talented. Was I always this talented?" He's always like second guessing himself. He's like, "Oh, maybe I'm talented. Maybe I'm not." Actually, we'll have to wait and see after every single result, which just gets super repetitive. And due to this formula, you kind of already know what's gonna happen, but like obviously the details get switched out. Like, oh, instead we're going to this dungeon about lizards, and this time it's gonna be about fighting turtles, and then you're like, okay, but I already know what's gonna happen because the formula. Roughly speaking, of course, the details are different. And times where there are really big challenges, he 4D chests his way out of every single problem, like some miracle. Like he you know plays different guardians off each other. Excuse me, constellations off each other, and then it's just like, what the heck? It's like, okay, I thought he would. I thought he had no talent, but apparently he's a genius. And when this happens, the story makes sure to tell you like, oh my god, he's such a genius. Like this is insane. This is genius beyond genius, basically. was just like it's just like okay, I guess. And when this is explaining that he's a genius beyond geniuses, the word talent gets used so much that it gives you a headache. Like if you took a drink every time you heard if you read the word talent in the story, you would be in a hospital or 6 feet under the ground, or both actually. So another gripe I have is just that his character has really weak motivations. Like in the beginning of the story, it's kind of elaborated um, throughout points of the story where like yeah his motivation shifts, but it doesn't get highlighted that often, or it doesn't get highlighted to the point where it actually affects the story. It's kind of like okay, yeah, my motivations shift. It's kind of like it's kind of like explained. His motivations are explained in order to close any like loopholes in the story. So it's like okay, we're gonna put this to the side and actually like go to the meta story, which is the constellations, the mysteries, what's going on in this world, etc., which is what people are getting into when they like read these type of novels. So it's not actually a bad thing, but it's kind of a gripe I have. Another huge one is that there's way too many cliffhangers. Like every single chapter has a cliffhanger at the end, which it's just too overused. You can't do that. Like it's just way too repetitive. So like should you read the story? Well, here's the good points of the story. I will go into the good points now, which is it has a really strong beginning. The beginning is extremely good. It's very it gets you into the mindset of like wow, this is like really serious. Like this like what's happening is serious right now. Like people are dying. Like this is like wow. Now that does go away with as soon as the Kim Hyuk gets better and stronger. The dangers that he encounters basically kind of just go away pretty much. And it kind of just turns into the, oh, well, he's in danger, but we already know he's going to somehow figure a way out. Well, in the beginning, it was like, wow, like he's very vulnerable. And that makes it exciting because there's tension in the story. Another interesting, another thing I like about the story is that the main character, Kim Hook Jin, has really interesting main character powers. His powers are based off observation. What he sees, what he feels, what he thinks, or what he sees, what he feels, yeah. Basically, his five senses are his powers. You know, a lot of optical, powers, like, example would be like, Naruto and the Sharingan. It's kind of like that. Like, he uses his eye. His eyes gives him power, see, I don't want to I don't want to give too much away. There's a really interesting mystery throughout the whole book because he's not actually the strongest person in the novel. There's actually a lot of other characters that are just as powerful as him, which just makes it more interesting because it's like he's not the only fish in the pond. He's not the biggest fish in the pond. So, in conclusion, it's a time waster to be honest. There's really no other way to say it. It's not good enough. In order for you to be like, yeah, I want to sit down and read this. It's kind of just like, yeah, it's good enough to like enjoy it, but don't think too much about it because if you think too much about it, then the story just kind of falls apart. Far too much repetition. As I said earlier, the arcs get way too repetitive. Um, it's just too formulaic at times. And there's just way too many cliffhangers. But that's kind of a personal gripe. I don't think it actually is that big a deal. So my rating for a Korean web novel is probably like a 5. Enjoyment rating 7.5. And if I had to critically analyze the story and nitpick every single little thing, it'd be like a 4.